I was about to munch into this apple, and I don't know if we want that
Dang.
recorded. Guys,
No, go ahead. Take a bite. Take a bite.
this was
How
a
many
total bonehead move on my end. But yesterday I'm at the grocery store and I get this apple, and I got 4 of them, and I didn't know it was $1.98 per pound. So she's at the register and weighs them all up. This is a $5 apple.
No.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm like, come on, Fletch,
Dude.
be
I better
better.
be juicy. But the heavier, the better.
I've
Huh?
gotten taken in by the apples too. They
Dude.
just you don't know what you're paying for them until you're at the register.
Well, I mean, with a name like Cosmic Crisp, too.
Fletch, will you give us a bite so we can really get that sound with you?
That was pretty good.
Oh, that's nice. Matt,
There goes $1.50 right there, Fletch.
Yeah, I have to give a compliment to McKenzie after I bashed him because I was very impressed with the page you sent out before this. I've done a couple podcasts, and that was by far the most impressive prep page.
We like a very particular look, and hey, you've reached the standard to the page, so it's worth it, right?
Well, Matt, I haven't fully read through that document. It was a little bit too long for me, but no.
Yeah, I skimmed it.
But I don't know if he mentioned that we hit with some pretty hard hitting questions, and my first one for you is just in the spirit of fruit. Which fruit do you feel like most closely resembles you, and why?
Oh gosh, this is so hard. I just want to default to my favorite fruits because that's an easier question.
Why I didn't ask it.
That's why I didn't ask.
Well, you can answer it if that's really where you need to go. Then we're just warming up. Like, I don't want to hit you too hard.
This is like a Google interview question, actually. This is that's not a warm up question. That's like a level 9.
The Dudes with Feeling automated question system before the podcast sent you a question. What fruit do you most resemble? Give a 60-second video.
I'm gonna go with a coconut. I try to be hard on the outside, but sweet on the inside.
But you're hard to break.
Wow.
Yeah, that too.
And you're a Swiss Army knife, which you can be turned into oil, food, shampoo.
Exactly.
Milk.
Yeah. Multi-purpose. I want to have many purposes.
Yeah,
Incredible.
that's good, man. One time I tried to climb up to cut down a coconut, and I got all the way up the tree, shimmying my way up there, and I started shaking on it just to realize I didn't bring anything to cut it. For some reason, I just thought I could pull the coconut, and then all these ants started crawling on me. They came out from the coconut onto me.
Where was this?
This is in southern Thailand, and I just all the way down, and I had no shirt on, so on the literally my entire stomach just ripped apart from this coconut experience. But that is not, is in no way lessened my love for coconuts. So I love that answer.
Do you have an answer?
Yeah, Matt, if you can't go get the coconut, just send a monkey who will go up the tree and get it for you.
That's true.
Yeah.
It probably was on your request I did that, Fletch, because Fletch was at the bottom of that tree laughing when I got down.
Yeah, I would have been you up too.
It was a couple of days later that a monkey, did steal my cell phone, but I guess we'll save that story for another podcast.
And then to add, also, Fletch was out last week because he went to Italy. Fletch, or overseas. I don't know if it was just Italy. Quickly, how was that excursion?
Incredible. I mean, I felt like I came back 10 pounds heavier, more infatuated with the world and art of espresso. And I reacquainted my relationship with pizza. You guys know that I have not liked pizza for the longest time. I refused to eat it. And pizza over there really stole my heart.
That's what's amazing about Europe, though. You can eat anything, and it's like good for you.
Yes.
Yeah,
Simple ingredients.
But there's something
pizza,
about the Domino's barbecue chicken pizza that just, I don't care. I'll gain some weight for that one. I mean, there's something about that. What do they call it? The Memphis chicken pizza, I think it's what it's called.
Barbecue chicken is one of my favorites.
Yeah.
So McKenzie has not been to Italy.
And he also has a brand endorsement with Domino's where he feels like he has to mention them in any sort of manner.
Yeah, people get, travel credit cards. I get my Domino's credit card.
Mm.
Yeah, well, sometimes the food is too healthy in some places, so it's good to come back. And that's what I miss from California, in and out so much.
That's fair. Okay, well, speaking of California, Matt, I would love to just hear, I know some of this story. We've gotten to hang out the last few weeks, which has been awesome. And just super pumped to have you on the podcast. Would love to hear just a little bit more about your journey. Why have you come into a place in which this is something that you care about? Yeah, take us back.
Sure thing. There's a few different reasons, and it all started, I'd say, right after college. I had the best experience in college, had a ton of awesome friends. And then I moved to Santa Cruz, which is 6 hours north. I only knew one person there, and it was really, really hard for me just over the couple years, partly because I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do in my career. And I was really far away from my family, and I had just had like the best time of my life for a few years. And then I moved somewhere brand new, and I think for a lot of people, that's some of the hardest time is right after, if you've had like really good time in college, because it's just having people like in your hallway, and like there's always guys to hang out with, and then like moving somewhere and starting a real job and not having a random time at like 2 p.m. to hang out with people or take a nap. But yeah, it was just the kind of the real world mixed with, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life, and I like lost my whole community. So I went through some pretty deep like anxiety and depression, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do in my future and career. And it was like everything was really overwhelming, and I didn't have a lot of tight. I eventually made some really close friends, but it took like a long time, and it was just a super hard time for me. And so that was part of the looking back. I had like no concept for what mental health was at all, and so that kind of inspired me to go deeper into wanting to educate guys on the importance of mental health and like what is it and why does it matter? Because I didn't know what a healthy I didn't know what to do to help my mental health. And I think that part of the problem is, even with like the spiritual side, is it's so divided from the mental and spiritual side. It used to be very, very divided. And so if you go to the doctor, they don't talk about anything spiritual. They just only talk about drugs and physical. And now doctors actually ask you if you're going to counseling, but which is nice and much more helpful. But kind of, this was like, I don't know, 12 years ago. It was super divided, and there was no intersection between like the spiritual side, the mental side, the physical side. And so I'm trying to integrate more of that conversation. So that was one reason. The other reason was, I had a friend when I moved to Charlotte. I watched a friend go through like horrible breakup, and I watched him become super depressed for almost a year. And then I watched him drink like alcohol, and every single day it was a ton of whiskey or a ton of wine. And it was kind of the only time I'd been super tight with someone who was going through a really serious, like crazy serious time in their life. And it was just super sad to watch. And it took me 3 to 4 months to get him to go to counseling and the doctor. And I realized that I wanted to help guys get into that much sooner. And there's a huge psychological problem, because I had the same issue most guys have, where it's like I wanted to be independent. I didn't want to ask for help from anyone. And so that was very eye-opening for me when I realized it wasn't until 25 when I realized like how helpful it was to just open up and be honest, because I was a typical guy that thought that independence was manliness, basically, and you shouldn't actually share your problems with other people, and I was just afraid of other people, and instead of being honest, I realized how much it hurt me. And then watching other guys struggle with like heartbreak, and then going deep into addiction and alcohol and other stuff, kind of showed me how important it was to educate guys on the importance of mental health and where to go for help, and also try to facilitate community where we can help each other.
Matt, I heard you say something around this idea that men want to be independent. Um, can you talk more a little bit about like where does that craving come from, and how did it show up for you? And yeah, just talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. So part of it is good. I think men are naturally more independent, and I work in finance, and you actually see this statistically. Men are much more risky than women in general. Um, the vast majority of men take much higher risks, and like we test this, and men almost not always. There's always exceptions, but in general, men have a much higher risk tolerance than women, and that corresponds to that corresponds a little bit to independence. Where it's healthy for guys to be more risky and more independent, but it's a problem when we take that too far. And so, especially American culture is James Bond independence, where it's like that. It's like a level 10, where it's I don't need anyone. I can do everything on my own, and I'm not going to show any emotion. And I think there's a pressure just growing up in being seen as a man, that you want to be worthy, and you want respect from others. And so I think that it's a problem because a lot of it comes from media, and then we copy what we see in the media, and it's a problem because then we copy that exact habit, being fully independent, and then we run into struggles and realize that being that way is not enough, and there's no healing that comes from being fully independent. And the first step to freedom is honesty. And so I think a lot of guys have just run into that and realized over time, me included, in understanding that healing, you can't heal on your own, and being fully independent and um, is a hindrance to that.
So that just that one marinated with me. The first step to freedom is honesty. I think I'm just kind of sitting with that. How do we get to the point in which we're honest? Because I think even you acknowledging, and I don't know how much of this is hindsight versus, you knew in the moment you were experiencing anxiety or depression. I think I can look back on my own journey and now say that's what I was going through, but I didn't have the honesty, the self-candor to be able to admit that's what it was. How do we develop that sense of honesty, and what is required to get to that point where we actually can be honest with ourselves so that we can work towards the freedom I think we all desire?
Yeah, it's harder than it sounds. I think because looking back, it's exactly what you said. It was the same for me, where I didn't have a language to even talk about what was going on mentally, and guys struggle more than girls with communicating emotion and what's going on internally. And so that's the first issue, is giving guys a language for saying I'm and it's kind of a template of emotion. That's one of the first steps, is giving guys a template for emotions. Like, what are your emotions, and how do you define them, and how do we understand what we're actually going through? Because it sounds really simple, but that's one of the hardest parts for guys to do. And so, being honest, you actually have to be kind of educated first around your emotions and defining those. And how we help guys do that is just kind of bringing the education to them and going through different emotions. And so I've done a couple. It was a few years ago, but I did a couple things along these lines, which were basically, I just had a small group of guys. It was like 10 guys, and I just had a night. We showed a video from there's a local company in Charlotte who did a really good job of just having like an overview and some stories of guys struggling with depression and anxiety. So I hosted like a night on learning more about depression, and then I did another one on anxiety. And so those were really helpful, and just because they kind of had therapists come on there and like describe what was anxiety, what was depression, what did it look like, and then it was cool because then we just went around and like shared a little bit about it. So there's a lot of things we can do, but even just helping guys understand and define their emotions is the first part of honesty and disclosure.
Matt, you were talking a little bit earlier about this wall that kind of gets set up where men kind of have this unwillingness to share, unwillingness to be vocal and share their emotions, or even have the motivation to do so. Where is that coming from? You mentioned the media, but I'd imagine that there's more deep-rooted motivations for that than just seeing it in TV and movies. I mean, where does this initial exposure to this kind of independent masculinity come from?
Yeah, that's actually an amazing question. And I was literally just showed this to Henry, this book with Lewis Howes, The Mask of Masculinity. And it's exactly what you're talking about. It comes from the masks we put on come from pain that happens to us, usually in childhood. And so most guys have a defining moment in their life of things that happen to them, and then they decide what they're going to do for the rest of their life. And so for Lewis, it was he got picked last on the I forget what sport it was, like the football team. And so when he was like 10, and so he goes back to that moment because he decided in his mind at that moment he was never going to be picked last again, and he was basically going to dominate people from then on. And then for the rest of his life, he played college football and then played on the Olympic team for handball. And so, yeah, usually it comes from a defining moment of pain. Um, and that's different for everyone, but that's also why the counseling is so important, because they help you go back to that moment and figure out how that different moments changed you. And I just think that's it's really, really interesting where that comes from. But it almost always goes back to some level of pain, and then deciding I'm never going to feel this again, or be
Yeah.
this in this situation again. The other oh yeah, the other really good example is I've talked to some people and I've seen some guys who have grown up just a lot more poor, and like significantly poorer than your average middle class guy, and a lot of them have a drive and a fear of going back to that place, and so they work on hyperdrive like their entire lives because they never want to go back to that, and that's what drives them. But it's different for everyone. But those are two like really interesting examples.
Yeah. And then on the other front, my other question is kind of on the other side. So you decide as a guy, like, okay, I'm going to go on this journey and I am going to kind of step into being more in touch and in tune with my emotions. I get a lot of resistance from guys in that experience in different men's groups and stuff because they almost feel like they have to lose their masculine side in order to become more integrated with their emotions. Um, Speak to that a little bit. How do you get into a place of becoming integrated with your emotions, but not having to lose that side of masculinity that has given you purpose or a better roadmap for handling your place in culture?
There's a lot of theories that go on that say men should embrace their feminine side or whatever, and I actually think the opposite. I think that inherently men are created to have a softer side, and so I think it's a problem that we've just labeled emotion as feminine totally, where that's not true at all. Emotions are universal, and guys actually have way stronger emotions than most guys express. And so, and you only know that if you're really close. You only really know that if you're close with a lot of guys, because a lot of guys just don't show them as much. But it's just a kind of a presupposition that people just believe men have less emotions than women, which isn't really true. It's just we just don't see them as much. And so I think how God created us is to be emotional. And I see a lot of guys have the opposite problem where they decide to shut off. Some guys I've known decide to shut off their emotions totally, and that hurts them deeply because then they can't connect with people naturally. And how to how to integrate, I think it's really hard. But it's been really hard because we've had such a strong cultural push in the past to being a hyper masculine strong man who doesn't feel anything, and now kind of in today's current society it's kind of the opposite where we don't, there's, you know, a man can mean anything now or it means nothing, and so it's kind of hard, even harder now to kind of integrate those two things. But I would say it takes work in developing both sides of that, and I strongly would say counseling helps a lot with that for sure.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I thought your answer to that was pretty close to what I probably would have said, which is that there's this piece that's just human. Like, we have emotions as humans,
Right.
and for somewhere along the way, I don't exactly know when it happened, we decided that we're going to split that, and like the emotions go to the feminine
Yeah.
side, or to females. Not that they're the same, but and then, you know, masculine is this like stoic, um, feel nothing, numbness, right? And we had a conversation recently, the three of us, on is no emotions an emotion itself? Because I've heard men say, I don't feel anything at all. Like, I don't know if that's even possible. Even the absence of feeling is a feeling, right? We're all always feeling something, and we experience emotions the same way. And it's, you know, I'm not sure there's it's hard to know what to do with that now, because so much of that has been so culturally embedded. I do think that what you said really landed with me on this idea of needing a template for conversation, and that does feel like such an actionable way to start. And sometimes it can feel a little strange because it feels like, well, I should know some of these things, or maybe I do know some of these things. And even when you were just describing your anxiety or depression, like the first question that came up for me was, what did that feel like? And a lot of times I see men that are drawn to words, and you've talked about this too, McKenzie, just drawn to like really simple feelings. I feel bad. I feel angry. I feel sad. It's like, these are the same emotions we were learning in kindergarten, first grade. Like, our emotional vocabulary has to develop with us. And it's totally fine if you're listening to this and you're like, yeah, that's me. Like, I just don't have that emotional vocabulary. I think in many ways, that's a large part of why we want to continue to come on here and have these conversations, so you guys can listen. And, you know, we're not going to get everything right. You may not agree with everything we're saying, but just the willingness to have more emotional conversations as men starts to develop that shared language where we can both develop deeper connections with other men, but also show up with whoever the relationship is in our life that we need to work through something with, or that we need to have a conversation with. And so maybe we can go there a little bit. Like, what did that feel like for you? Like, what does it feel like to be in that place? Because I know there's men listening to this that might be experiencing something like that, anxiety, depression, and don't have a way of identifying it. And I know that, you know, you've talked about counseling and therapy, but I'm curious if you can give a little bit more language to that.
Sure. I think the majority of men have, it feels like the world is kind of like closing in, I think, in a lot of ways. And it feels like that men aren't needed. And I think that's what I felt when I was really going through it. It's like, I don't matter because I'm not needed. Like, I don't make a difference. And that's what, there's a recent study actually that kind of was looking at suicide stats. And so 50,000 people committed suicide last year. 80% of them were men. And then there was a study of asking kind of like suicidal men, like, why would you contemplate, like, why are you contemplating this? And they said that they feel like men, they don't feel like they're needed. And that was number one reason. And so I think that is the biggest temptation to believe, when me or you're going through a really hard time, is to believe the lie that I'm not needed and nothing matters, when the
Yeah,
reality is the opposite.
yeah, Matt. It reminded me of another study where they took suicide notes from men and looked at what were the words that they most commonly used, and the two words that men use in their suicide notes after they commit suicide is useless and worthless. You know, and I think a lot of that has to come with this idea that if I can't reach these certain markers of success, like I can't be a financial provider for a family, I can't um, become a certain level of toughness or strong than these other masculine guys I see, then I have no contribution to society as a result. You know, we get into this terrible habit of comparing ourselves to other men. There's this study done in the book Guyland by Michael Kimmel where they studied guys and how much they thought their friends drank alcohol, like the quantity. And they found that we think like 3 to 5 times more than what the reality is for our friends. We think our friends are way more masculine than us, right? And that's just simply not the case. We all have that like big demon, that big defining moment that we're struggling with contemplating and navigating. And so I love what you said there. I think that's spot on.
Yeah, I want to go back to emotion just really quick because I remembered another study, and this is why, like, you could tell guys this study, and it would probably help with emotion and the importance of emotion. And so what happened was, it wasn't even a study. It was what happened to this guy. This guy got into an accident, and the surgeons had to cut out part of his brain that it's the part of your brain that makes decisions, and I forget which part of the brain it is, but essentially he couldn't. Oh no, sorry, it was the part of your brain that has emotion, and I forget which part that is. But so this guy didn't have any capacity to feel emotion, and so everything else was normal. They just cut that part out of his brain, and then he goes around and does it, and is doing life, and then he realizes that he can't make any decisions at all. He can analytically compare like 5 different options, and he literally couldn't decide any decisions. And so that was like kind of a groundbreaking discovery in understanding that emotion it plays a huge role in decision making.
There's an entire book on that called Emotional, Why Emotions Shape Our Thinking.
Ooh,
Like
nice.
it's brilliant. It talks about this intersection between feeling an emotion and inserting critical thought into every single decision, and why it's important to make sure that both of those are contributing to your decision making, because without one or the other you can't make decisions. So I love that. I love that. That's so
Yeah.
spot on.
See, this is why I knew you guys needed to meet, because y'all read more books and more studies on men than anyone I know. Okay, something's coming up for me, and maybe we can start with you here, Fletch. Like that defining moment, we've talked about that a couple of times. Like, what is that defining moment? Does something come up for you guys? Because I know you gave the example of Lewis Howes, and I'm going to ask you, Fletch. Like, is there a defining moment that you can think about in your life that maybe has like set the stage for some of the things that you've had to work through? Um,
Um, peering back into the childhood, I think, I don't know. It's funny that this is coming up because I was really thinking about. I was looking at my myself in the mirror last night, which I think we all tend to do, but I was just really caught in a gaze, and the reason I was caught in this gaze is because a lot of people, when they first meet me, don't know that I have this scar right under my eye. But then some people will see it right away. And I can tell when they notice it too. Their like face kind of changes and they kind of go into an investigative mode. And then some will even ask, like, hey, how'd you get that scar? And 90% of the time I don't give them the correct answer because I want to catfish them or tell them a more exotic story about a shark attack or barracuda. And then I eventually tell them that I went through a glass table when I was 2 years old. And I was talking to my mom about it. And for the longest time, when I was this little kid, I didn't even want to go to school because I had this huge scar on my face and it was so big. And I felt like kind of an outcast. And I didn't smile from like age 2 to like 3, because I lost a lot of feeling in this side of my face, and I also was like just very sad about the scar and like going through this glass table. Um, I don't know if this is like going into the direction, and this is my Lewis story, because I don't believe that moment impacted me in a way where like now I have to go prove the world that I'm a pretty person or like am happy. Like I felt like there was just a lot of maybe unresolved trauma that came with that whole event. Um, yeah,
Mm.
that's at least what was coming up for me.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing, bro.
Yeah.
McKenzie, is there one for you that comes up?
Oh gosh. There's a bunch of different things that come up for me as like moments that I look to, but then also I think um, in knowing that every guy has this pivotal decision or this decisive moment in their childhood, um, there's also things that I think happened that happened before I was even old enough to remember, and my body is still reacting to it. And so uh, there's a couple guys I work with who kind of feel the same way, and the pivot then turns to, rather than focusing on okay, what's that pinpoint moment, um, we focus on like the emotions that stem from that moment and how we can step into like newer emotions that don't keep us paralyzed in the same place but can progress us out of that. And so I think my defining moment probably happened before I even remember. Um, and I think that defining moment often gets influenced by the flaws of your parents. Um, and we're kind of entrusting when we're first born that our parents have the answers for us in every aspect of our lives. And getting older and recognizing that they may not have the answer for you, I think is something that every guy battles with, but I definitely battle with as well. What about you, HD?
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I think it often is related to parents. And I think I shared this with Matt a couple days ago, actually, that there was a moment when I came home from school in 4th grade. Sorry, no, there was a moment where I came home from school in 5th grade. It was the first time I had gotten actual letter grades. And I was pretty proud of myself. It was like progress report. I had to go home and get my parents to sign it. And I had maybe a couple of A's, some B's, and then I had this one B-/C+. And I remember going and asking my mom to sign this, like thinking she's going to be really proud of me. And she was livid, like could not stand the fact that I just got a C. Took me outside, started screaming at me, and basically was like, Davises do not get C's. We do not get C's. And I'll always remember that moment because there was something that shifted in me there. It was like, whoa, like, okay, one, like, and my mom's amazing in so many ways. So I'm not trying to make this about her, just that something shifted there where I started to believe that my value was in the letter grade. And eventually that letter grade turned to whatever I could accomplish in work. And there is this piece in me that I wrestle with constantly that believes that I am what I do and what I accomplish, and my value and my worth is placed in that. And if I'm not measuring up to what I expect of myself, that I'm failing, I'm coming short, I'm not worthy. And I continue to wrestle with that every
Yeah.
single week, every single day. And I think that moment was one of those moments in my life. And from that point, I never got a C in my entire academic career. Never got another C.
It actually, you sparked a memory in me that actually I think I could probably tie that defining moment. Was I was in a class, I was in art class in like second grade, and uh my family always touted me as this great artist, and like my art teacher thought I was this fantastic artist, and they started submitting my art into like different competitions and stuff like that. And I remember at one point the teacher raised up like the painting or whatever I was working on and was like, look, here's a great example of what I was talking about. And then, I thought I was super accomplished. And then we get in line to get ready for lunch. And one of the kids uh, goes, being good at art means you're gay.
Mm.
And then that was like a whoa, light bulbs, like what I'm doing is not something I am kind of deal. And so I think that kind of made my decision to steer away from art when I was a young kid and kind of move into something different, because I didn't want to be affiliated with something that was considered gay. So I would say like your story reminded me of like something like that,
Cool.
that definitely
Wait,
became one of those pivotal decisions.
Yeah, you didn't do much art after that?
No, I really didn't. I just started getting into art like again 2 or 3 years ago. Like
Yeah. I mean, that's
it's
life changing.
yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, Matt, he's an incredible editor, so that is an art form. So it depends. We can dive into this whole rabbit hole of what is art, right? Because I will fight tooth and nail and say the fact that you put on clothes and that hat this morning is an artistic act. That is something that is a value of mine that I hold near and dear. But I know what you're saying, McKenzie, and I think that is what I hear is when we share like the story, right? When Henry just shared that story, it brings about memories and stories in our own lives, because that's how we take in the world, right? We're always trying to like bring it back to us, right? And how we identify.
Which is the power of these group conversations, and why I think it's so powerful to join together with other men and talk about this stuff is like your work is my work, all you guys. And like I learned so much just really compassionately listening to your stories and being open to how that might connect to something. So it's such a gift when we can come together like this. All right, Matt, you're the only one who hasn't shared on this. I know I feel like I asked you this recently. There wasn't something immediate, but maybe something's come up. Anything come up for you?
Um, I think it could happen later in life also. It doesn't have to be super young, but I mean, I do really go back to my time right after college and thinking that I just remember thinking for some reason it was like I was looking at myself externally, kind of like an out of body experience, where I realized that I was feeling like one of the worst moments ever. And I realized in that moment, looking kind of at myself, that so many other guys, somehow I just knew that so many other guys in the world feel that way like every single day. And I eventually got out of it. But it was a defining moment that kind of launched me into a path of trying to help other guys and really help define like my purpose. And so that's what I'm really passionate about. And I think I'm trying to empower other guys to do the same. How we can, it's not enough just to know the stats and know how bad things are. It's like the more guys we can have that can pour life into another guy and say, even if everything's going wrong in your life, just say that like, I'm here for you and I'm committed to you. Like that is life changing. And so I would try to be that for as many guys as I can, and really try to communicate that so other guys can be that for other men too, because that's how we change the society and the state of things.
Yeah, Matt, your organization is called No Man is an Island, and I thought that was such an interesting name because the summer camp that Henry and I grew up at and that Fletch worked for, there's a there's a hymn that we sing for the chapel service on Sunday, and it's called "No Man is an Island." No man stands alone. Each man as my brother, each man as my friend. And I think I loved kind of tying that back after seeing that you called your organization "No Man is an Island." So speak to like where that name came from and why that is the pinnacle point of your approach towards men, is the fact that they don't have to be an island.
Yes, thank you. I just read this poem by John Donne, and it's a beautiful poem, and it's titled "No Man is an Island," and it's a really beautiful concept that says, um, and really shows that every person draws something else out of someone else, and so if we lose, like if I lose one friend, like I'm also losing a part of myself because he can only draw certain things out of me. And so it's really about how we're created to be interconnected and how every person matters and the dangers of being alone. And so I kind of experienced and seen a lot of guys experience when you go through a breakup or depression or whatever it is, the automatic temptation is for you to just go down into yourself and retreat from other people and not share like what you're going through, and that's the worst, kind of the worst thing you can do because you need to engage with other people in community in order to heal. And so I've realized that community is essential to healing, and so like you grow together, and we heal together, and that's how it works. And so I wanted that to be the defining concept because that's self isolation and self dependence kind of is I think the main problems with how men act today.
I feel like the modern day stoic and stuff that gets tossed around on social media and gets shared really puts that isolating, I can get through it all by myself up on a pedestal. And like directly talking from experience, I think that when we're going through a hard time, it's so easy to fall into the narrative in our own mind of, I need to go through this alone. And it becomes a cycle. And we keep believing, oh, I need to go through this alone. I need to go through this alone. And that cycle ends up becoming very unhealthy. Um, because then we draw back to it when every time we go through something hard, and life isn't going to get any easier. It's only going to continue to throw different things at you. So I think building these habits and kind of like what you were talking about earlier in the pod of having like a language template, it's almost like having a template for adversity. And so like when you're going through that transition, because your transition from college to catapulting out into the real world, that's not a rare transition. So many kids do that every single year, right? And so many kids probably go through that transition. So if they could have some sort of um, template or way to kind of deal with that adversity, I think would be so awesome.
Yeah, that kind of just reminded me. The number one core lie that gets in the way of men asking for help is, I don't want to bother that person. And it's every guy's thought that and done nothing because of it. And that's the number one lie that keeps men from getting help. And so you really gotta. I try to throw everything I can at that lie because most men will help other men, and you have to get past that and realize that you got to keep trying. Like if one guy doesn't help out at all, like you just got to keep going. Find another counselor.
Yeah.
Like be desperate for any kind of help.
There was this guy in a group that I was in, and he just kept on emphasizing this point that he's like, I have no guy friends. I've got no guy friends. And it wasn't until someone stopped and asked him the question, what's the version that you're showing those guys of yourself?
Oh yeah.
What's the version you're showing them? And more often than not, we believe as men that the version we need to show everyone is someone who's perfect with no flaws and no problems. But really, it's those flaws and problems that are the key to actually connecting with another guy. By saying, I'm struggling with this, you're not only acknowledging yourself that you're struggling with it, but you're giving them permission to admit to their struggle as well. And I think that's what's so powerful about that, that's so misconstrued about this idea of, I don't want to bother them. You could be giving them an opportunity to share that you've never realized or they've never realized before. And so I think there's so much power to being vulnerable that's beyond just yourself. And I love that. I love that.
Mackenzie, you've shared something with me one time, and I want you relationships and just kind of dump it and vomit it out into their intimate relationship with their partners.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that, Mackenzie?
Well, there was a study done, I believe it was in the UK, and they analyzed a bunch of men and how they handle relationships. And they found that men try to maintain this masculine image with their other guys around them. You know, these very interest level relationships where you can go to the bar and shoot the shit, but you're never going to actually talk about something you're struggling with. And then in turn, they still have this human need for connection. And so they actually find themselves over conforming and over relying on a female in their life, whether it's their mother, their girlfriend, their wife, or just a friend that's a girl, to be that emotional outlet for them. So when that relationship, let's say you have a girlfriend and you're sharing everything with them, when that relationship fails, you can't turn to your guy friends because you need to maintain a masculine image. So your whole world kind of feels like it's crumbling. And so men find themselves over conforming to the women in their lives because they feel like that's the only emotional backbone they have in their life because they need to maintain that masculine friendship. So it's a real problem, and it's something that uh, I recognized in my life when I was in high school. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like maintaining all this masculine image in front of all my friends in high school, and I have like a girl that's a friend, and I relied on her for all of my emotional output, and it was incredibly unhealthy because of that.
Hmm.
Matt, I think you might have mentioned a similar point to me when we were having lunch. Do you have more to say about that?
Yeah, I just saw an article. It was like crazy. It was like in Vogue or something, like some random article I saw online, and it was the same thing you're talking about, but it kind of blew me away because I'd never really thought about it from the girl's perspective. But I found it super fascinating. It was the same thing. It was like all these guys, all these girls who were dealing with their own lives and problems, and then they realized that they're also shouldering the burden of all of their guys' emotional problems. And so, guys, I don't think guys understand the fact that they're really hurting the the women that they're with in pushing off all their emotional burdens onto them. So it kind of blew me away when I read it. I never thought about it.
I do feel like kind of going back to this, the conversation that we were having about like divine masculine, divine feminine. I do feel like a man is able to show up better in his relationship in that divine masculine when he is having healthy friendships with other men, and then can show up and not just be an emotional wet towel to his partner. He can actually be someone who is kind of equally meeting the partner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think healthy men give other men strength.
Mm.
And so when they're not getting that from other men, then they're trying to get it from themselves or their women, and it just doesn't work that way.
Mm.
Yeah, and but you mentioned, you brought in this idea of the divine, which I think is a good thing. I wanted to make sure we hit on this in this podcast, and I know it could be its own podcast, but there's this integration that happens for some of us. I know, Matt, this is a big part of your journey and my journey. It's one of the reasons we connected, and it's where faith meets mental health. And I think there's people in the faith community that don't realize that this is actually an amazing tool for strengthening our mental health. And then I think there's people in the mental health community that don't realize, hey, this may be something that you should consider, because it's a real thing that can be incredibly powerful and helpful. And so I just wanted to give you a little space to speak to that. Like, why do those worlds not seem like they mesh all the time? Where is that disconnection? And anything else you'd want to say about that?
That was to me, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's a really tough question.
Mm-hmm.
I think not. I think not enough guys understand it because they're brought up trying to be strong in themselves, and a lot of guys do it that way, and some of them, they think it works for a while, and they're super strong on their own for a long time until something happens or until a breakup, and then life falls apart, and then they don't know how to or what to turn to or how to get out of an addiction or a breakup or emotions. And so I think those type of guys need to look for other options, and like the number one option on the faith side obviously is God, and looking to that. And so people, like guys on that side, need to open themselves up to the idea of God and how that turning to a divine being can transform their life, because that's really the only thing that truly transforms you, is looking to something outside of yourself. Um, and then on the faith side, I think most of us grew up in a time, and even still today, I hear about mentors and leaders who are against are against any kind of medication, or um, even counseling. It's crazy, but I think it's really dangerous, because the problem is the leaders in all these areas go outside of their expertise, is what happens. And so I think some pastors go way outside their expertise in recommending against medical solutions, and I think medical, like doctors, go way outside of their expertise and think think that drugs are the answers to most things. And so that's part of the problem, is that we have like leaders in each of these areas. They go way beyond their field of influence. And so there's not enough people that understand the integration and the importance of that integration. So yeah, part of it is fighting, and that's become part of kind of my mission, is fighting a level of thinking in some aspects of Christianity that says like that medication and doctors and everything are bad, for someone that's struggling with mental health, and for a lot of people it's saved them. And so it's hard to say, and it's a really tough question, but yeah, that's just a few things I have on that.
Yeah, it's almost like you're kind of attacking the problem in two fronts, where you've got guys who think they have to be perfect in front of others. And so what they really need to be is more honest with others
Mm-hmm.
and more honest about their flaws. And then it sounds like the similar thing needs to happen on the faith side, where these guys think that they have to be perfect in front of God. And so since they're not perfect, they don't deserve a relationship with God. But what they really need to do is be honest with God and be more honest and vulnerable with their relationship with God. It's like a really interesting dynamic. You're playing between these two fronts that kind of have the same message and purpose, but in different ways.
Yeah, I was actually in a small group with a pastor, and I mean, he was like somewhere around 50 years old, and he had anxiety, like bad anxiety, like I think most of his life, and he never he basically never went to the doctor and was never diagnosed until he was like 50. And then I think it was just kind of a hard realization, because I think he had a belief that I shouldn't have a chronic anxiety disorder because I'm a pastor. And so I think that's a problem for a lot of Christians, where we think if we depend on God perfectly or pretty or good enough, then I won't have chronic mental problems, which isn't the case.
Yeah.
I think God helps a lot of those problems, but he doesn't take away um, all those issues immediately.
Mm. That's good. Yeah, and it feels like I've always felt the love language of God in many ways is humility, and so it's interesting to think about where that message got lost, because it does seem like God just asks us to come humbly before Him, and to be willing to, like you said, McKenzie, be vulnerable, share the things we're struggling with, and um, so I know it's whether it's to God, whether it's to other men, both in an ideal world, um, that we need a release. Like, we need to let this stuff out, and I still think there's a narrative, and maybe there's some guys listening to this that are like, really, why do I really need to let that out? Like, I'm fine, and just um, maybe are continuing to distract themselves with work. I want to leave with on a practical note. What do we say to that person? What do you guys say to that person? Maybe I am that person some days. Um, what can I do to start to release some of this burden? If I'm a guy and I'm struggling with my emotions, I'm struggling to face some of this. What's a practical step I can take? What do you think, Matt?
Sure, yeah. I would say if you're not going through something hard now, then it's coming, and you don't want to be alone when that happens. And so that's part of the issue with guys who kind of throw the rest of their life away when they start. For example, they start dating someone or have dated someone for years, and then they don't invest in anything else, and then a breakup happens maybe, and then they don't have anything left. And so I would just encourage, just have a more holistic life, and that means invest in a couple guys around you. So I would say join a small group, join a men's group. Um, Make it a priority to join a space that's men only. Like, I host some bonfires sometimes for guys, which are really fun. And there's a great organization too called F3, and it was started in Charlotte. It's nationwide. It's outdoor workouts for men, and they're free. They're free, and they happen like all over the country, and anyone can join. And so that's a really good one to hop into, where it's a lot of outdoor workouts, and there's some really great guys that go to those groups that I've met, and they're everywhere. And I would say too, just to um, you want to be you want to understand yourself better. You have to understand other people and know what they're going through. And so to achieve like another level of self-awareness, that only comes most of the time through other people. And so I think that's like a really big benefit of guys that maybe aren't that interested in it. It's understanding that other men make you stronger, and other men push you, and I believe only other men can truly challenge you. And so that's, for me, that's like one of the best reasons.
That's awesome. Thanks, Matt. What about you, Fletch?
Practical advice:
Yeah.
start to tune into your intuition. I think it's very tempting to continue to keep all the information up in your head and continue to read more and continue to keep everything up here and filling up your computer and your hard drive with data. And we are spiritual beings having a human experience, and so teaching men how to flex the muscle of intuition and getting in touch with yourself simply by putting your hands over your heart and sitting still for a minute, 2 minutes, and just asking yourself how you're feeling.
That's good.
I would say that happiness, striving for happiness, is not good enough. You deserve more. You deserve to live a life in peace, and a life of joy, and a life in which you can feel honesty with yourself and connection with others. And so if you're striving for just happiness, you're not actually living a life in the full picture. And taking that step back and saying, you're right. I don't deserve just happiness. I deserve way more for my life, I think is something that can help those guys who may have not had that moment in their life where everything crumbles. And so they have a newfound motivation to get better. But have getting real with yourself and saying that, yeah, I want more in my life than just happiness. I want love. I want honesty. I want peace. So that's what I would say for that guy.
Mm. I've been reflecting this week on how anything worth doing, or anything that's truly transformative, requires sacrifice. And I would just encourage you, and I encourage myself this week, that if I really want to change and continue to transform, then I have to be willing to give something up. And if you sit with yourself for a little bit, I bet you there's a good chance there's something that you probably need to give up in order to break through to that next step, or to that next chapter or phase of your life. And so I just want to encourage you to have the courage to be willing to do that. And I find the best way to do that is to replace a no with another yes. So if you're going to give something up, then what's maybe something you can add into your life that sparks joy for you, that actually is positive for you, that doesn't have that kickback that so many of the vices often have. So that's it for me. Just being willing to sacrifice, be courageous. It's really tough to do. I'm with you, I promise. And Matt, thank you, man. Thanks for hopping on, sharing your wisdom, bro, and for all the work you do to bring men together. I think all of us know it really does matter.
Thanks for having me. This was awesome.
Matt, order yourself a Domino's pizza after this one.
Matt, you're seen and you're heard from these three guys through the ether. Yeah, I think Henry was starting to do a nice wrapping on it, but from me to you, thanks, man.
You guys are awesome. I love it. It's been a great convo. Thanks for having me. Appreciate all you guys. I hope we can all keep talking.
Yeah, I'm gonna get these guys to Charlotte on a nice, beautiful blue day.
Yes,
I'm just gonna love it.
I'm excited for the future of this podcast and organization.
Thanks, man.
Okay. Thanks, Matt.
Peace. Thanks so much for listening, guys. I hope that was valuable and insightful. And before you go, do whatever you got to do today, I want to share something with you that I'm really excited about. On January 21st to 26th, we are hosting Peaceful Warrior, a men's wellness retreat to El Salvador. This is going to be an amazing group immersive experience, digging into a lot of these topics on what it means to be a man and a healthy man in the world today, a whole person. We're going to be moving, we're going to be eating well, we're going to be sharing a lot of meaningful experiences together. There's so much more to say about it, but go do your own research. You can find more at yournextretreat.com. Can't wait to see you guys there, and have a beautiful day. Peace and love.